Imagine a high, snow-white peak shrouded in legends and scary stories. This is Lenin Peak in the Pamirs, a place where not only the courage and dreams of mountaineers met, but also the inexplicable, almost mystical power of the mountains. Strange disappearances of entire groups, camps destroyed in seconds, experienced athletes disappearing without a trace on familiar trails. All this sounds almost like the plot of a horror movie, but it happened in reality. In the realm of eternal snow and hurricane winds, people often say that the mountain itself chooses who to let return and who to leave forever among the cold gorges. And every year, climbing these dangerous slopes, climbers involuntarily wonder, isn't there another mystery waiting in the silent heights which will carry them away without leaving an answer? Lenin Peak, located in the Pamirs and now known as Abu Ali ibn Sina Peak, was originally named after Vladimir Lenin at the beginning of the Soviet era. The official name was approved in 1928, when the country was looking for symbols of revolutionary achievements and preferred to give large natural objects the names of leaders. Since then, Lenin Peak has become one of the most iconic 7,000ers in the Soviet Union, where climbers from all over the world flock to. Despite the fact that the mountain is not considered technically the most difficult, its height and unpredictable weather have repeatedly led to tragedies. Some of the stories have been widely publicized, while others have remained half forgotten or even fallen into obscurity. One of the little-known episodes was the mysterious death of 3 tourists in 1980. Then, in late summer, a modest group of 2 men and a girl decided not just to make a mountaineering ascent, but to take a unique independent route from the southern side of the peak. In fact, they were not professional climbers in the classical sense. The 2 worked as engineers, and the girl taught at the Institute of Physical Education. However, they had experience of treks of the 5th, 6th categories of difficulty in the Caucasus and Tian Shan, which allowed them to count on success with sufficient care. It is said that the first signal that things were not going according to plan was mysterious conversations in one of the intermediate camps. The trio was seen late in the evening. They seemed exhausted, but excited. They mentioned some old trail along the ice ledges, which promised to shorten the time and see unique landscapes. Experienced climbers from neighboring groups discouraged them from this idea, saying that the route was untested and could be extremely dangerous. But the adventurers just waved them off, assuring them that they had a detailed map and that they had climbed similar slopes before. When the group left the camp in the early morning and headed for the new section of the trail, the weather was more or less favorable. No one saw how they moved or where they stopped for the night until the evening. Presumably, they were supposed to reach the direct line to the high camps in a couple of days. However, the next day or the day after, no one saw them approaching. Attempts to contact them by radio were unsuccessful. The signal was either interrupted or not received at all. The first suspicion that something was wrong arose about 3 days after they left. The experienced rescue team began to search for the travelers, expecting to find them somewhere in a snow cleft with frostbite, but alive. However, all landmarks such as campfires or footprints in the snow crust disappeared without a trace. On the 4th day, they found only the girl's backpack, neatly leaned against a piece of frozen ice. Inside was her notebook and some teaching aids, no signs of panic. On the contrary, the notes looked as if she was keeping a diary. Clear today, went to high ground, and then a cliff. There were no alarming markings, as if the backpack had been left for a short rest. Later, when the rescuers examined more inaccessible parts of the slope, they came across an old, barely visible rope railing, which had been used by someone long ago. But from the looks of it, they were running through scree and cracked areas. There were traces of a campfire, perhaps an overnight stay, but no bodies, no other equipment. It was thought that if the hikers had been killed in a rock slide or avalanche, at least some of their belongings would have survived nearby, but no one and nothing was found. By all accounts, it was as if the people had vanished. Some speculated that the group had been swept into a deep crevasse and pelted with ice. Others spoke of a sudden storm that might have covered everything, destroying any evidence. However, the local guides noted a strange detail. In those days, no large snowstorms were recorded. The weather was indeed unusually smooth. Some thought that they might have lost their way and gone sideways, trying to find that scenic route, and ended up in a dead end. But then why did they leave the backpack behind, and why? Official reports only acknowledged the loss, stating that the fatality was presumed to have occurred as a result of an abnormal emergency. This story was hardly covered by the media. It was overshadowed by another high-profile tragedy on a neighboring route where several famous athletes died. And the fate of 3 amateurs remained all the more unnoticed. Some old-timers and veteran climbers recalled it only in a narrow circle, saying with a tremor in their voices that the mountains probably did not want to bring these people back. Lenin Peak, despite its less intimidating reputation than other 7,000ers, sometimes turns out to be much more mysterious and unpredictable. Over the years, the legend of the 3 missing tourists has grown into rumors. They say that someone found strange marks in the snow in the upper part of the glacier, as if a tent had been pitched there and a bizarre ice arch hanging over the tent, which was compared to a gateway to nowhere. Others claim to have heard ghostly screams in the late evenings, but this was written off as windplay and deception of hearing. Either way, the story was never followed up, and no definite facts were given. One of the most dramatic examples was the ascent of Lenin Peak, now known as Abu Ali ibn Sina Peak, in August 1974. A women's team led by Elvira Shatayeva reached the summit, but perished on the descent when all 8 participants were at the mercy of unpredictable elements. The expedition was formed as a demonstration of the possibilities of Soviet women's mountaineering. At that time, some believed that women could not compete with men in extreme mountain conditions, while others believed that even at altitudes above 7,000 meters, a team of 8 experienced sportswomen could act no less professionally than male teams. Elvira Shatayeva, the leader of the group, had extensive climbing experience and strove to form a cohesive team where each participant knew her responsibilities and felt supported by the others. From the very beginning, the trek went according to the plan. Having set up a base camp at a relatively low altitude, the climbers made acclimatization walks, moved some equipment to intermediate camps, and prepared for the final assault. Although the weather in the first days of August was changeable, it did not seem critically dangerous. The mountains often spoil climbers with short intervals of relative calm. When Shatayeva and her group reached the final part of the route, nothing seemed to portend disaster. It took only a few days to reach the cherished point. The summit of Lenin Peak was conquered by the women. It was truly a bright triumph, given the technical and psychological complexity of high-altitude mountaineering. However, already at the first steps back, we began to feel a growing anxiety. The weather suddenly began to change dramatically. The mountains, calm during the day, prepared a real hurricane by the evening. The wind increased to extreme values, the temperature dropped rapidly, and snow streams began to sweep away everything in their path. The climbers tried not to panic. They tried to communicate by radio with other groups and potential rescuers. Alarming messages about the growing storm and sharp deterioration of the girls' condition reached down only by scraps of phrases. The altitude of over 7,000 meters makes severe demands on the body. Hypothermia develops rapidly, and the lack of oxygen impairs coordination and narrows consciousness. Staying on the ledges and ledges of the peak, the women tried to build temporary shelters, but the storm tore down the tents, covered the slopes with dense snow, and cut off the ways to safer places. At one point, they chose to stop, hoping that the storm would subside a little. However, the blizzard only intensified, and contact with the lower camps was lost. In conditions of almost zero visibility, severe frost and hurricane gusts, it was almost impossible to descend. Any attempt to move threatened to fall into unknown crevasses or rock slides. After a few days, the bad weather weakened. When rescue teams were able to climb to the suspected location of Shatayeva and her companions, all 8 participants were already lying there with no signs of life. Official reports indicated that the cause of death was hypothermia combined with complete physical exhaustion. Trapped in the cyclone's death trap, the women could neither return to a more reliable route nor wait for help. The mountains simply did not give them a second chance. This tragedy caused a loud resonance in the USSR and abroad. Many people asked themselves, could they have foreseen the storm and postponed the descent? Or could they have chosen another route to avoid the area where the weather was raging? Should the rescuers have taken more risky evacuation measures? But all these ifs are often useless in extreme situations. High-altitude mountaineering is a sphere where one wrong decision or a confluence of several unfavorable factors can lead to fatal consequences. The memory of Elvira Shatayeva and her friends is firmly embedded in the history of Soviet and world mountaineering. On the one hand, this expedition proved that a female team is capable of serious climbing and can reach great peaks without the help of men. On the other hand, the tragic outcome became a bitter lesson. Even on known routes and with seemingly stable weather, mountains remain unpredictable. Any minute of delay, the slightest overestimation of one's own strength, and the mighty element takes the lives of people who dreamed only of overcoming themselves. Since then, Lenin Peak has been treated with even greater respect. Women's expeditions continued to plan ascents, but their preparations included stricter requirements for weather forecasts, radio communications, and evacuation planning. The story of the deaths of 8 Soviet female climbers has come to symbolize the bravery and the high price that sometimes must be paid for such feats. The summer of 1990 was unusually calm in the mountains. Weather forecasters were predicting favorable weather, and teams from different countries were already preparing for their ascents. The main camp was set up on a picturesque green plateau at the foot of Lenin Peak, where streams from melting glaciers splashed. From here to the summit, there were several stages of ascent with intermediate stops. The expedition organizers were sure the route was proven, the equipment and provisions were stocked up, experienced instructors were invited. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. From different corners of the Soviet Union and neighboring countries came climbers who decided to conquer a simple, by the standards of high-rises mountain. This reputation made Lenin Peak especially attractive. No super complicated rock climbing was needed, just good experience, perseverance, and proper acclimatization. Immersed in conversations about tactics, new climbers, and fresh bikes, people were settling in the camp, waiting for further instructions. Besides, together with the Soviet groups, athletes from Czechoslovakia, Germany, Israel, Switzerland, Spain, and Italy arrived on the mountain. The general mood was elevated and inspiring. No one had yet guessed that in just a few days the peak, which seemed hospitable, would show a completely different side. Ahead would be grueling glacier crossings, an unexpected change of weather, and the very morning that would change everything. From calm preparation for the ascent to a blood-chilling collapse that would be talked about in the mountaineering community for years to come. It all started at an altitude of about 5,300 to 5,500 meters, where climbers usually set up an intermediate camp. This level allowed them to get used to the thin air and rest before further ascent. In mid-July 1990, there were already more people here than originally expected. Some groups were delayed because of the need to get used to the altitude, while others were planning a quick move to higher ground. The tents were close together, and the general excitement did not subside even in the evening. Athletes were communicating, exchanging weather forecasts, preparing equipment. According to eyewitnesses' memories, the night of July 13th was quiet. In the morning, there were no pronounced signs of a possible icefall, no loud cracks, noticeable cracks, or huge rock slides in the visibility area. Nevertheless, the mountain concealed a colossal ice mass, which appeared ready to break off at that very minute. The exact hour of the catastrophe is given differently in different reports, approximately between 6 and 7 a.m. A sharp, rolling rumble echoed throughout the glacier. Before people realized what was going on, a snow and ice avalanche fell on the camp. Huge blocks of ice and snow rushed down from the heights, burying dozens of tents under them. Eyewitnesses who were lucky enough to be a little higher up the route or off to the side described the sight as a huge white wall that wiped out everything around them in seconds. Those who survived near the periphery were left in shock. The camp disappeared under a multi-meter layer of ice. A gust of wind from the powerful descent literally knocked several climbers off their feet, and small shards of ice scratched their faces and hands. Instantly realizing that there were dozens of people under the rubble, the survivors rushed to dig out the debris. But they soon realized that this task was almost impossible. The thickness of the displaced glacier and compacted snow was too great. Shovels, ice axes, and hooks were obviously not enough. The deep holes dug by the rescuers in the first hours did not yield any results, or they found only scraps of tents and icy personal belongings. In such conditions, it was critically difficult to act. The altitude of over 5,000 meters, thin air, a serious test in itself. The climbers had to breathe carefully, take frequent breaks in order not to faint from fatigue and lack of oxygen. Many of them did not have special avalanche feelers or equipment capable of scanning the ice thickness. Soon, the first reinforcements came from the lower camp. People, having learned about the disaster by radio, began to climb up as fast as possible. But even outside commands could not change the situation dramatically. The glacier remained too vast, and the weather could change at any moment, making rescue difficult. Some participants recall that at the time of their arrival, there was an oppressive silence. It was clear that there was little chance of digging out survivors under such a volume of ice. Nevertheless, the search continued for several days. Rescuers dug deep shafts, constantly moving through the massif, hoping to find any signs of life. They found fragments of tents carried away tens of meters from the original place, personal photos, diaries, and fragments of equipment. It was only after some time that the bodies of the victims were recovered. It was confirmed that more than 40 people, climbers of different nationalities, died in the disaster. Rescue work was completed by the end of July, but some of the bodies remained deep in the glacier. It was impossible to extract them without special equipment, and helicopters at such an altitude could not carry out the necessary hovering for large-scale operations. Relatives of the victims had to collect documents and wait for official identification reports, which dragged on for many weeks and even months. Trying to find an explanation for the tragedy, experts considered various factors. They said that the ice in the upper layers could have cracked from temperature fluctuations, and the long thaw had imperceptibly weakened the structure of the massif. Microseismic activity may have played a role. Versions were multiplied, but no precise unified opinion was formed. Pamir is a complex system of mountains and glaciers where, alas, such catastrophes can happen suddenly. In the summer of 2001, one of the strangest and most inexplicable incidents in the history of mountaineering occurred on Lenin Peak. A group of 4 people, 2 Russians, a Spaniard, and a girl from Poland, disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a few mysterious details. All of them were experienced athletes with an impressive list of climbs, and the route they chose was considered quite classic. Acclimatize at base camp, set up tents and provisions at the high-altitude camp, and then attempt to storm the summit, which rarely surprises experienced teams. According to the memories of the climbers who saw the group in early July, there was nothing to portend trouble. The weather, although changeable, was not catastrophic, and the disappeared looked confident in their abilities. After the base camp, they went up to the high camp where they set up 2 tents, leaving burners, food, and sleeping bags in them. They were expected to spend a few days acclimatizing and then set out on the final part of the route. On the evening of July 11th, in the camp at the foot of Lenin Peak, they noticed that they never got on the radio. No one was worried at once. Bad weather could have delayed the group, and they could well have taken refuge in tents, waiting for better conditions. However, 24 hours passed, then another day. Not a single signal came from the climbers. Then it was decided to bring up rescuers. When the search team went up to the high-altitude camp, the tents were untouched. There was no driftwood, no traces of avalanche. Inside the tents, everything was in its place. Even the equipment was not torn apart, as if people had gone out for a minute and did not return. The alarm was increased by the fact that nearby on the snow for some distance led the footprints of several people, but after a few tens of meters, they were lost, as if they had been covered by the wind or continued on very hard ice. The backpack of one of the Russians, carefully placed on a ledge 200 meters away from the tents, made an even creepier impression, as if it had been left purposefully and without signs of struggle. A couple of days later, a barely legible notebook, soaked with snow, was found in the search area. There were only a few words about some lights up the slope, after which the phrase was cut off. There is no explanation for this to this day. Some witnesses believe that the climbers dreamed of strange lanterns or a mirage characteristic of the high mountains. Others believe it to be hallucinations due to oxygen deprivation. In practice, none of the neighboring groups confirmed that went out on the route to that area at the right time. For several weeks, rescuers scoured the neighborhood, alone or with dogs, in good weather and through snowstorms. There were theories about an avalanche, but no obvious signs of avalanche were found. There was talk of a fatal stray on an unfamiliar part of the slope or a sharp deterioration of the weather, but the tents remained intact and there were few signs of icing. Some pointed to the peculiar structure of the glacier, where there may have been hidden crevasses. But nothing resembling fallen equipment or clothing was found in the suspected rifts into which people might have fallen. Rumors of glowing lights and the group's strange behavior have spawned mystical speculation. Allegedly, the climbers could get into some anomalous zone, go to the mythical call, losing touch with reality. Some associated it with legends about ghostly phenomena. Others believed that people were simply under the influence of mountain sickness and took illogical steps. Whatever the case, the bodies were never found. There are no documents about what happened to them after they left the tents. Official reports called what happened a possible outcome of an emergency situation and suggested that the disappeared were carried away by a snow avalanche or ice slide, or that they fell into a crevasse. However, no conclusive evidence of this was found. As a result, the version remained open, and the families of the missing were given only their personal belongings found in the preserved camp. Now this story is perceived as one of the ominous mysteries of Lenin Peak. Experienced athletes disappeared without a trace in the mountains, leaving almost no clues. Those who come here every summer remember this case with a bad feeling, as if the mountain itself hides something more than avalanches and glaciers. Sometimes climbers tell how they too have seen unknown lights at the top in the dark, but no one can say for sure whether it is the reflection of the moon, the glare from neighboring slopes, flashlights of brave night groups, or the glow of an old legend that has been lingering for years. Each of these stories, from the mysterious deaths of 3 hikers in 1980 to the deadly hurricane that killed Elvira Shatayeva's group, reminds us how dangerous and unpredictable Lenin Peak is. The mountain, which many considered to be a simple 7,000-meter peak, proves every time. In the high mountains, even a minor mistake, underestimation of weather or self-confidence, can lead to tragedy. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked the video and want more such materials, be sure to like, share with your friends, and subscribe. Very soon you will be waiting for new exciting videos about the most mysterious and dangerous corners of the planet.